Canada experienced something that had never happened in the country's modern recorded history. Net migration went negative. More people left Canada than arrived. A country that had been running immigration numbers above 900,000 per year in 2022 and above 1.1 million in 2023 watched its net migration figure turn below zero for the first time since the Second World War ended. Canada's population shrank by 100,000 people in 2025, the first annual population decline since 1945. And the Prime Minister overseeing that reversal, Mark Carney, has a net approval rating of plus 23, according to the latest Abacus data. That combination, historic immigration reversal plus record approval numbers, is the central fact of Canadian politics right now. Understanding how this happened requires going back to what Canada's immigration system looked like before Carney took office. For most of the 2000s and early 2010s, net migration ran at between 200,000 and 300,000 people per year. It began rising after Justin Trudeau's 2015 election, coming in above 400,000 in 2018 and 2019. Then the pandemic ended and the numbers exploded. Net migration exceeded 900,000 in 2022, exceeded 1.1 million in 2023, and remained at 800,000 in 2024. To put that in context, Canada was adding the equivalent of a mid-sized Canadian city to its population every single year. In addition to existing natural population growth, the driver of that surge was not primarily permanent immigration. It was non-permanent residents, students, and temporary workers. The Trudeau government responded to post-pandemic labor shortages by loosening the temporary foreign worker program, allowing employers in certain industries to hire up to 20% of their staff through the program's low-wage stream. Simultaneously, the government made it easier for temporary visa holders to become permanent residents, which created a documented pull factor. More temporary workers entered Canada, specifically because the pathway to permanency had been widened. Canadian educational institutions, meanwhile, have become increasingly financially dependent on foreign student tuition fees, which drove student visa numbers from approximately 200,000 in 2015 to a peak of nearly 700,000 in 2023. The public response to those numbers was swift and measurable. According to IRCC polling, the percentage of Canadians saying there were too many immigrants coming into the country rose from approximately 20% in 2020 to an all-time high of 54% in November 2024. That 54% figure represents a majority of the Canadian public, a country that had for decades been described internationally as one of the most pro-immigration societies in the developed world, expressing the view that the immigration rate was too high. The shift in public opinion produced a shift in political salience. By 2024, immigration had become one of the defining issues of Canadian politics, directly tied to housing costs, labor market pressure, and quality of life concerns that voters were expressing across party lines. Carney's response was direct and documented from his first post-election press conference. He pledged to reduce the total number of temporary workers and international students from over 7% of Canada's total population, where it stood when he took office, to less than 5% by the end of 2027. His government implemented caps on temporary residents, tightened the pathway from temporary status to permanent residency, and reduced the pull factors that had been drawing non-permanent residents to Canada in historically unprecedented numbers. Those policies are the primary driver of what happened next. In the first half of 2025, net migration came in at just 60,000, a dramatic contraction from the previous year's figures. Then it went further. In the third quarter, net migration fell to negative 90,000. In the fourth quarter, it fell to negative 100,000. In the first quarter of 2026, it registered negative 50,000. The non-permanent resident population fell by more than 500,000 since the peak, a reduction at a scale and speed that Canada's immigration system had never previously produced in the opposite direction. The demographic consequences of negative net migration in a country that also has negative natural population growth, where more people die than are born every year, are significant. Canada's fertility rate currently sits at approximately 1.3 births per woman, well below the 2.1 replacement level. Natural population growth is therefore already negative. The combination of negative natural growth and negative net migration produced the 100,000 person population decline of 2025. For a country that had structured its economic and fiscal planning around sustained population growth to offset an aging workforce, that 100,000 figure represents a genuine demographic discontinuity. The permanent resident component of the migration shift adds a layer that is separate from the temporary resident caps. Net migration among permanent residents has also fallen, partly because making the pathway from temporary to permanent harder reduces the pipeline of people who would otherwise become permanent residents, but also because the number of Canadians and permanent residents leaving the country has risen slightly. A TD Economics analysis found that better qualified Canadian immigrants were actually more likely to leave Canada, suggesting that the domestic job market has structural difficulty absorbing or providing career progression for highly educated candidates. That pattern, called brain drain, describes an outflow that is disproportionately concentrated among the workers whose skills have the highest economic value. The political arithmetic of what has happened under Carney is counterintuitive on its surface. The famously pro-immigration Canadians are rewarding a prime minister for restrictive migration policies. But the counterintuition dissolves when the housing data is added to the picture. Falling immigration rates have contributed to a moderation in Canadian house prices, a direct material benefit for the large share of Canadians who aspire to home ownership but had been priced out by a housing market where demand, pressure from population growth consistently exceeded new housing supply. When housing affordability improves or even stops getting worse, the political salience of immigration as an issue declines, because one of the primary visible consequences of high immigration rates in tight urban housing markets has eased. The immigration salience data confirms exactly that pattern. The percentage of Canadians saying there were too many immigrants coming into the country fell from the November 2024 peak of 54% to 47% by late 2025. The percentage saying the right amount were coming rose from 34% to 38% over the same period. As net migration declined and housing pressure moderated, immigration moved down the list of voter concerns, replaced at the top of the political agenda by the economy and Canada's trade relationship with the United States. Issues on which Carney's government has presented a clear and active response through tariff countermeasures, trade diversification, and major infrastructure investment. Carney's net approval rating of +23, with a personal approval of +19, reflects a political positioning that has successfully navigated one of the most rapid reversals in immigration policy and public opinion that any developed country has executed in the modern era. Canada went from 1.1 million net migrants in a single year to negative net migration across 3 consecutive quarters, a swing of more than 1.2 million people per year in the direction of the migration balance, within a 2-year period. The political leader who presided over the second half of that transition is currently described as perhaps the most popular centrist politician in the world. The problem that had become Canada's biggest political liability under the previous government has been turned around not gradually, but at a speed that the immigration data describes as without modern Canadian precedent.